So let's find out. When did Britain and America stop hating each other? Such an interesting thing. Obviously, I'm an American here, and the thing is, we know the story of the American Revolution. Essentially, the colonies breaking away from the power of Great Britain, and the war, and then eventually we gained our independence. And then, we kind of fast forward to the War of 1812, where the UK just straight up burned the White House. And then, from then on, I think, the biggest shift would have been, World War One, am I correct? That's when, I think America really got heavily involved, kind of, integrated itself. I think especially in World War One, after is where America really stepped up in the world stage and, was getting involved with what was going on in Europe. And I would imagine there, because America was, in the UK side in both world wars, or at least supported the UK, so that's what I would imagine. Let's find out, though. When exactly, specifically, did we stop hating each other?
It would be an understatement to say that Britain and the USA's relationship got off to a rocky start. In 1812, Britain and America were at war, but just over a century later they were fighting shoulder to shoulder in World War One. Which obviously raises the question, when did Britain and America become allies? There had to be a point where both went from actively disliking each other to working alongside each other. Now, before continuing, it's important to note that even in the immediate aftermath of independence, America and Britain still had strong economic ties. This isn't to say that things were always great between the two, and there were some pretty major conflicts of interest in the years after the War of 1812 finished. The first, and perhaps the most obvious, was the Monroe Doctrine, established in 1823. This was where the United States, by threat of military intervention, declared an end to any new European colonial adventures in the Americas. And for Britain...
Yeah, we covered the Monroe Doctrine with the Historia Civilis video, and I think it was Koenig, right, who essentially helped Britain secure a better position through his agreement with John Quincy Adams. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, but yeah, I think that's when we talked about it.
And this was potentially a problem because it had economic interest in South America. In reality, though, it wasn't too much of a problem at all, because in 1833 it landed a force on the Falkland Islands and America did nothing. In 1842, the US did warn Britain against interference in Hawaii, which Britain did heed because America's international power was certainly growing. And it was this fact that America was a rapidly growing great power whose interests could no longer be ignored, which would dominate Anglo-American relations for the following century. So the next major event which could have changed the Anglo-American dynamic was the American Civil War, which broke out in 1861. Britain had already abolished slavery at this point, and so you would think that it would have preferred the Union over the Confederacy, but you'd be wrong. Now,
yeah, wasn't it I think due to the war, there was a trading conflict with the South not being able to supply cotton or something like that? This was in the oversimplified telling, if I remember correctly, and that some of the European powers wanted a quick end to the war so we can get back to the trading. At least that's how I remember it.
Britain had no great affection for the Confederacy and its slaveholding practices. Its preferential treatment was purely economic, mostly due to cotton imports. Britain did consider formally recognising the Confederacy, and Anglo-American relations were severely harmed by what's called the Trent Affair. This was where the US government seized a ship with Confederate diplomats headed for Britain, which to Britain looked like the USA telling it who it could and could not speak to. In the end, cooler heads prevailed and Britain didn't get involved, although it did construct a very powerful warship, the CSS Alabama, for the Confederacy. And after the Civil War was over, Britain paid compensation to the United States. Thus, only 50 years away from World War I, Britain and America still didn't really care much for each other. So what changed this? Well, relations actually started to improve during Britain's border dispute with Venezuela in 1895. This developed into somewhat of a crisis, and the US intervened and arbitrated, siding mostly with Britain. For Britain, America had conducted itself in a well-mannered fashion and given Britain most of what it had wanted. And for America, by accepting American arbitration, Britain had yielded its right to influence South America. The other reason for Anglo-American rapprochement was simple: converging interests. America had emerged from its civil war a more centralised industrial power, and after its defeat of Spain in 1898, it possessed a global empire too. And for Britain, things were rapidly changing as well. Its empire and global position was being threatened by Russia and the newly formed Germany. Britain had long practiced a policy of isolationism with respect to the European powers, but since they too were industrialising, this had the potential to threaten Britain's position. Thus, her most natural ally seemed to be the United States, since it was half a world away and had its own sphere of influence, plus they spoke the same language and shared many values. It was at the turn of the 20th century under President Theodore Roosevelt that America and Britain really started to become friends, particularly with respect to one foreign policy stance. They didn't like Germany. This agreement allowed for Britain to move its fleet away from its Caribbean colonies, back to Britain to defend itself from Germany, while security in the Caribbean would fall to the US. After the First World War broke out, Germany's actions, such as U-boat attacks on American shipping and the Zimmermann telegram, combined with the fact that if Britain and France lost the war, they wouldn't be able to pay their American loans back, assured US intervention on their side. And from that point onwards, both the US and UK were largely in the same camps, barring a couple of mishaps here and there. I hope you enjoyed this.
That is interesting. I jumped the gun and just went straight to World War One. That's when it happened, you know, and we kind of became friends. But I didn't know about all this other stuff in between, like the intervention, Theodore Roosevelt. So that's so cool, actually. Yeah, I didn't know about all that in between stuff. That's kind of like an area in American history we don't really cover much, oddly enough, here. So either way, that's really cool. Another great video from the Great History March.